reality is we don't have an organization that's 100% agile, that does agile by the book, that basically goes through all of their events, all of their metrics, and they're doing things in a fashion that was really prescriptive, or the way that, well, the founders of Agile or Scrum thought about it more than 20 years ago.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my guest and, we'll say, international Agile celebrity, Simina Fodor. How did I do on the pronunciation there?
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Trevor, and hello, everyone.
Absolutely. So you're coming to us all the way from Romania. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and the 5 people that probably don't know who you are from LinkedIn?
Well, I'm not that famous, to be honest. Well, I come from the land of vampires, starting off with the joke. Most people know Romania because of vampires and, well, all of the movies that we've seen around it. But joking aside, as Trevor mentioned, I am highly involved in the agile space, so I am passionate about the topic. I'm currently a delivery manager. I am on Agile Troublemaker because I do express my opinions out on the internet, so to say. And I've spent the past 2 decades while basically leading teams in different environments, mostly remote teams and hybrid teams all across different continents and different time zones. And of course, across different personalities and mood settings, all the way from we've got this to, well, production is going to be messed up in 2 days from now. Outside of my 9 to 5, I'm also a consultant and trainer, and I do run a little piece of Substack called Scrum and SaaS, which is basically my corner at the internet where I, well, make my opinions known.
Well, just so the audience knows too, you said you're from the land of vampires. This is in the evening your time, correct?
Yes.
So are you trying to tell us something?
No, I do have mirrors around me, but you can't see them.
And let me guess, you're not a fan of garlic either.
Not so much.
Okay, well, let's get going here. So as we've established, you are a self-proclaimed agile expert, I'll say. And one of the things that I know you're famous for is talking about myths of agile. What are some of your favorite myths that you want to bust right now?
There are many, many myths. I'm just going to focus on the one that are more interesting and usually spark conversation. The first one would be that velocity equals productivity 100%. I know there are a lot of people out there that are really keen on using metrics and are really familiar with this one. So that would be a first one. And then, of course, also around the myths aspect of things, well, agile means no planning. Because unlike other frameworks, we can do everything without planning. So those are just 2 that come from the top of my mind. And I will provide a little bit of explanation to both and my viewpoint on them, of course, because I do like to express my opinions out on the internet. So for the first one, velocity equaling productivity, well, I'm gonna go into a joke as well because I am a jokester at the end of the day. So the way that I see velocity is basically like a horoscope, and it is the horoscope of agile metrics in general, because a lot of people see what they want to see with this one. So it was a lot of people read into it more than it was meant to be, rather than this being a tool to help us in terms of forecasting and making our planning better. They see things that aren't really there. For example, you may have 2 teams. One delivers an X amount of tickets or work. The other one delivers more, maybe double. And the general consensus there might be, well, one team is more productive than the other, but without knowing the context, without knowing the specificity for each of the teams. Or you may have teams that value their points or the tool that they use to estimate their work. And 5 points might mean something totally different to a team versus another team. I don't know. For one, it might mean adding a color to a button, while for another, it may mean a whole entire user flow. So I think that's one of the most common things that we see out there on the internet. And of course, there are a lot of people that might disagree with me. I'm open to conversation. Prove me wrong.
Well, I want to pull on something there that you just brought up and in passing of story points, because, velocity is one thing that's always fun to discuss, but story points, that's how fights start in any agile environment, right?
Yeah. Well, if we think about the beginnings of Agile and Scrum and all of the different frameworks that we have out there, well, they're not prescriptive. So story points, they weren't in any book. They weren't in any guide when these frameworks were actually invented, where they were starting to get documented. So story points is something that we came up along the way to make things easier and to help us. And again, going back to story points might mean something totally different to various people. I think it's also a matter of perception. So the ideal theory that we should be thinking is that story points are not absolute values of measure. They don't equal time. You don't have 3 story points that equal half a day or maybe 2 hours or 5 hours, or regardless of how many hours you want to invest there. I think that's the one of the biggest challenges that we have across the industry is story points are usually equaling the amount of effort rather than thinking this in relative terms. So they're supposed to help us. They're supposed to help us assess the complexity of the different pieces of work that we have. And they're supposed to help us in terms of planning. If we have a certain capacity based on our prior experience, we're supposed to be able to estimate how much capacity we're going to have in the next cycle of work, rather than looking at things, oh, we've delivered 35 story points. That means that a similar team might be able to deliver 35 story points. But again, it goes back to context.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that story points helped with was helping create arguments on the internet.
Oh, yes.
Because to your point, we just started off talking about myths, and story points are like, I don't pretend to be an Agile expert. I know enough to get me into trouble, but story points are the thing that you bring those up and there is a universal groan in the room.
Yes.
Especially when you're in a PMO versus just a team meeting. And to your point, I think that it's just that they're misunderstood at the baseline because there's no documentation of them, as you highlighted.
Yeah. And if you think about usually bigger organizations where you have multiple teams, it kind of gets to a point where you have certain expectations around story points. So people are used to, I don't know, we've seen 3 teams that deliver X amount of story points. That means that everyone should be in the same boat and we should have a baseline. The minimum required would be, I don't know, 20 story points or 30 story points. It doesn't really matter the number. And that's also another challenge that we see around expectations. And it kind of feels like instead of making our lives easier, instead of comparing apples to apples and bananas to bananas, we're kind of mixing things a little bit. And this is one of the many different directions that Agile is currently heading towards. So we have a lot of information that's available out there, but not everything does consider context, and not everything considers, well, the reality of things. We have different organizations. The reality is we don't have an organization that's 100% agile, that does agile by the book, that basically goes through all of their events, all of their metrics, and they're doing things in a fashion that was really prescriptive, or the way that, well, the founders of agile or scrum thought about it more than 20 years ago, because technology also evolved and people also evolved and context also evolved.
Yeah. And when we start talking about PMOs and then we go into EPMOs, where there's multiple PMOs underneath an EPMO, which is the enterprise level versus the local level, each PMO centralized to their functional area could have a different definition of story points. So you could be literally comparing apples to pizza.
Exactly. Even more complicated.
Yeah. And then you've got an executive or an EPMO team going, why is there such a discrepancy when they're not even playing the same sport in a lot of ways?
Yeah, and those are usually the moments where executives ask questions. Well, is this team more productive than the other because they've delivered many more story points than the other team? So it does go back to basics and expectations. And well, Agile is a fun world. If I think about it, not just on the internet, but in general in different organizations, because when you say Agile, it means so many things to different people, but they don't have the same understanding.
Yeah. People don't realize that Scrum is a subdivision of Agile, but Agile is not, Agile is a subdivision of, or Scrum is a subdivision of Agile, but Agile does not equal Scrum.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not clipping that. That's going to stay there.
This is going to be a fun one, Trevor.
That's what I do. I told you this was going to be fun. So, you started to, I know we're skipping over a little bit here, but you started to talk about the gap between theory and delivery. And I think that's a huge topic now because Agile is by design a fairly regimented process, or supposed to be. And theory and application aren't always the same. And we're talking about 20-year-old documents that have they stood the test of time?
If we think about the principles, yes, because we can still apply the same principles 20 years later. If we think about the how, well, considering we've evolved technology, we've evolved as a human race, I would like to consider that, quite honestly. There are many different things that have changed in the meantime. So it's kind of a yes and no in the same time, if that makes sense. Because Agile at its core, it's not necessarily about software delivery. Well, you're supposed to do certain things to evolve, not just in Agile, but in general. So the way I see Agile is it's focused around expecting, inspecting, adapting, and then doing things better. Of course, we care about business value because at the end of the day, all companies want to produce money. Of course, that's not even in a question here. But I think it's all about that adaptation piece of it. In terms of principles, yes, we still do that, but how we do that is a little bit different. You may have different organizations that don't necessarily follow all of the events. They don't do their time boxed events right now. They do something adapted that makes sense for their organizations. You may have teams where some of the events are happening asynchronously because you have time zone differences, or you may have people that don't even speak the same language. So they might rely on, I don't know, AI to translate some of the parts, or maybe even some things like Google Translations and more rudimentary tools. So there's a lot of evolution that has happened in the meantime, but at the core, the principles are still there. So we
I want
still think about people rather than processes. So we're still trying to make things easier, and there is that speed part of Agile that's still currently, well, I would like to think it's still being considered. So that hasn't changed.
I want to pull on something there that you just brought up because it's something that I've dealt with for cultural differences, but also, you talked about using AI or translation tools for translating foreign languages. There's a lot that can be lost in translation, pardon the pun, but literally never mind via text versus conversation, because I know I message people all the time and then you've got to put LOL or JK or some type of other abbreviation to let them know it's a joke because they can't tell by the inflection of your voice.
Hmm.
And I'm going to imagine you've dealt with a lot of that international flair and language barrier. Let's talk about that.
Well, quite a lot. I've been one of the few fortunate people. Well, I'm hoping not one of the few, actually. I've been one of those people that have had the opportunity to work in international environments. So ever since starting my career many, many years ago, I worked in corporate type of settings, meaning that I usually had access to people from different countries, not just within Europe, but also North America, Latin America, Asia, and other world areas as well. And the cultural aspect of things is a huge thing. So when I first started out my career, I didn't understand sarcasm. I didn't understand the jokes that were part of different cultures. And when someone sent me a message with LOL, my first thought would have been, well, what does that refer to? Are we talking about a joke? Are we talking about a abbreviation? Are we talking about something that's really specific to English, British English, American English? So there are different aspects to consider here. So yes, that cultural aspect plays a huge role in communication, even in terms of verbal communication. So the way that us humans usually react is we like to read the people that we interact with. But if we do it via a camera, body language isn't always that visible. So you may not read the inflection of the tone, you may not read the face, you may see different things that maybe are there or aren't there. So cultural aspect is a huge thing. In terms of written communication, using AI, well, it kind of removes the emotion behind things. So you can see if someone is really frustrated based on how they send a message. You might read certain things, but it's not always that visible. You may not read the tone, and especially if we're considering the accuracy of translation, depending on the tool that you use, you might not get the same thing. You might not get the things that are highly specific to a certain world region, whether that is a dialect or it's something that's specific in terms of sense of humor. You have the cultural differences. Some people are really straightforward, while some people value a lot the human connection and the emotion part of it. So there are definitely a lot of things to consider here. And in the world of delivery in general and project management, there are so many different things to consider when delivering projects, not just the cultural aspect of things, but also a lot of other different factors. So if I were to express my opinion here is use AI wisely, just like with
Well,
any other topic.
there's a couple of things there. One is when you use, I'm going to ask you this because I haven't had to deal with it, but the translation piece, and I'm beating on this one a little bit more because it's something that, since I have somebody that's an international person that deals with a lot of different languages, I'm assuming that from the translation tools, it would be a literal translation, whereas AI is more of a interpretive translation to kind of keep it translate it to make it sound more language, more common language than it would literal translation.
Mhm.
Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, but it depends on the individual as well and their level of comfort and their familiarity with using the tools, whether that is a translation tool or AI, because it depends on the prompts that you give
Mm-hmm.
usually to AI. So you may have certain prompts and you're used to using AI on a day-to-day basis, and you make sure that your communication is really straightforward if that's the culture you're interacting with, or it's more warm and more full of empathy, but you have to be a user of said tool and you have to know your tool, the limitations, and how you actually use it. So it depends, I guess, here. It
Yeah,
really depends.
and the other thing that I want to touch on with the cultural side is I learned this working on an Israeli project with the Israelis, that you're not just looking at the cultural pleasantries and the cultural discussions. You're also dealing with their religious calendars or their cultural calendars, and you plan your delivery not only around your calendar but around theirs as well. Because when I was working with the Israelis, there was a period of time every year where they basically were gone for like a month. Like we would get days here and there, but we never got complete weeks. And we had to plan ahead knowing that that there were going to be those gaps in the schedule and those gaps in delivery and gaps in availability.
Yeah, definitely. And the more you work with international cultures, the more you find out about their schedules, their holidays, the things that they really value. And it does affect the delivery, well, the timelines for projects in general. I used to work with a lot of cultures from Asia, and the funny thing about that is I realized that if I'm working with folks from North America and Central and East Asia, the majority of my November is not tailored towards
Mm-hmm.
progress because we have Thanksgiving, we have the Diwali holiday in India, we have a couple of holidays in Romania, we have a couple of holidays in France and Germany. And if you put all of those together, you basically have almost like a full month where nothing is really happening that much. And then you have the Christmas period, which means that half of December people are going to be out anyways. So in terms of timelines and project plans, if you think about it, from 12 months of the year, you have more than 1 month, maybe 6 weeks, where because of the different holidays that you have and because of the different countries you're working with, well, not much progress is going to be made there. It's basically like a dead period.
Yeah, you're looking at you're in essence looking at a 26-week sprint or 26 sprint velocity for the year, and 2 to 3 of those sprints you're just cutting them off at the end of the year, saying we're just going to count these as a quarter velocity at best.
Yep.
And then and then going back to story points, you're comparing apples to pizza again.
The wonderful world of delivery.
Yeah, and to your point, to the whole point of all of this is you've also got to be able to explain all of this to your executive leadership about why the velocity goes down during those periods of time, because you can't rely on executives to know all the cultures and calendars of the entire world unless they're tied into that too.
Yeah, for sure. And you may have people that haven't been exposed to those topics before. So you may have executives that perhaps didn't work outside of their own country with folks from outside of the country or within the continent, I don't know, or within their time zone. So there are different things to consider. And especially around holidays, you don't have just that period of time. You also have Easter, which
Mm-hmm.
based on the world region where you're located, it's sometimes in March, sometimes in April. It depends whether it's the Catholic version or the Orthodox version, or if you're following the old calendar or the new calendar. So there's a huge gap in terms of the way we perceive holidays and the way we perceive usually the time off. And again, going back to that aspect of things, you may have countries where you have a mandatory vacation time of 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. So it depends on the benefits that you have. And not all executives are familiar with that aspect of things. Many of them may be familiar with, I don't know, 2 weeks being the minimum that a certain country is allotted in terms of vacation days. So, yes, in terms of time, you have to consider the cultural aspect of things, holidays, benefits based on the country and the legislation of that country. So, many, many wonderful things about the world of delivery.
And we haven't even gotten into the internal corporate policies themselves, because certain companies may say, I know that in the US, there's a lot of companies where we get to November and it's use or lose for the holidays. for your paid time off. So people are scrambling to use all their paid time off in November and December. And in addition to the holidays, they're just, you start seeing ghost towns real quick. And I'm sure it's
Yep.
similar to that all around the world of just different times of the year where people are told, take your time now or you don't get it.
Or going back to the cultural aspect of things. For example, Italy is off the full month of August because they enjoy summer. So that's
Mm-hmm.
a cultural aspect that's really known in Europe. And when you usually do your planning around go lives and specific hard deadlines that you have to hit, you have to stay away from August if you're working for with folks from Italy. And there are other countries across Europe that have a similar period, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But this is something that's highly known within the world of Europe.
Yeah, I used to have a boss who, in the US we're famous for talking about snow days and winter days and stuff like that. I had a boss who used to tell us at the end of our team meetings on Fridays, I see about 6 inches of sun outside, so that means we're calling it after this meeting for the rest of the day. Or in your case, it might be what, 30 centimeters?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so let's I think we've kind of exhausted that topic. So, what was the other myth that you wanted to discuss? Or do we not remember going back that far?
Planning. That was
Okay,
around
planning.
planning, the fact that agile means no planning. And I guess this is something that is discussed on a lot of forums, both online and offline, by various people, whether they are executives or not. And it depends on in the amount of exposure they've had to agile previously. So when agile came about many, many years ago with the different frameworks that we have around Scrum, Kanban, and so on and so forth, a common thing that appeared there is, well, let's look at the new bright shiny thing. This means that we're not going to do any planning, so we're going to be agile and we're going to adjust along the way. And this is actually a funny thing because if we were to compare it to traditional project management, well, frameworks and methodologies such as waterfall, it is a huge difference because people were used to doing things a certain way. You used to plan your effort ahead of time, do a huge chunk of planning, and then you would typically have at least a few months until you would see the results of your work, or maybe a year, maybe two, depending on the length of the project, of the complexity and the project. And this is one of those cultural mindsets that people went through. Oh, so we're no longer doing planning. This is the fun new thing. But instead, the mindset adjustment that has to happen here is we still do planning in Agile. We just do it in a more frequent way and we adjust more frequently and we take feedback from the market, from the users, what's working, what's not working. And it goes back to that part of inspect and adapt and then do your changes, see what sticks and see what doesn't. And in terms of planning, we still do planning in Agile. We just do it more frequently. We don't do it at the beginning of the project and we call it a day.
Well, that's the funny thing is the first ceremony in the agile methodology is sprint planning. And we
Yes.
argue that there's no planning. It's like that is a 2 to 4 hour blocked off or time boxed meeting per doctrine of agile. And we say we're not planning.
Yeah, and if you think about this goes back to that topic around, well, what the theory tells us versus what the reality is. We do have a lot of teams in general and a lot of organizations that don't spend that much time on planning because they do consider they have to adjust along the way. So they might change their scope mid sprint. They might do certain things differently after the work has started. And I think this is part of it where it originates from. But also in the same time, in terms of planning, I still do believe that planning is an important aspect of Agile as well, because if you don't know what your goal is, how do you know if you're getting there? So you might construct the most awesome thing, the most awesome solution, but it doesn't fix your problem. It's a solution for a whole different thing. So planning is definitely something important in Agile too.
Yeah, I'm reminded of I was listening to a podcast where a military person was talking and he's like, I've never gone on a mission and myself included in that. I've never done something and said, man, I wish we spent less time planning this out. I've never thought that. I've never thought we spent way too much time thinking about the problems or contingencies or anything else that we could have seen that I just wish we had spent less time on that and more time just going straight into it.
Yeah, and I think it is part of the human nature as well, because us as human beings in general, we tend to rush things and we tend to have less patience on the things that consume a lot of time and we don't see immediate results.
And that's planning because planning, and I'd also like to get your take on this because when I think of planning, I don't just think of building out a schedule. I think about risk management, RACI raid tools, all those different tangential things to just not just the schedule, but forecasting what can come to me, what can become a hiccup down the road.
Yeah, definitely. I would also add dependencies in that. So, in an
Absolutely.
ideal agile world, you would have a team that's working in a clean environment. They're not dependent on anyone. They can do anything they want. But the reality is, in most organizations, at least the ones that I've been a part of, you usually have multiple teams working on different components, working on different services, working sometimes on legacy systems. And you do have to consider dependencies as well, because most agile teams, they're really not self-managed and self-sufficient. They have dependencies with other teams, unless you live in an ideal organization where everyone has their own ownership and they're able to actually deploy things into production and they're able to ship things without relying on others. And I haven't seen such an organization so far.
Wait a second. You mean to tell me that agile teams are not self-contained, siloed off? Nobody bothers them besides what they're working on for that project?
Well, in the many, many years I've worked in the agile space, I can tell you for sure, I haven't seen such a team. But I don't know, maybe someone can prove me wrong.
Maybe that's the team that's doing strict agile by the book, following every single rule, every single ceremony, everything.
Yes, for sure. Well, I think it's also a matter of we have the books that are telling us a thing. And
Mhm.
I'm not trying to question our frameworks, methodologies, documentation, everything we have out there, because those are really valuable tools. But the thing is, reality usually hits us somewhere along the way. So things are not perfect. Things are not the way they're described in books usually, because there's the human element of things, and us as a race, we're unpredictable most times. We are resistant to change. We do have cultural differences. We do have different schedules, different holidays, different personalities. And when you add that human component into things, that's where things change. So one of the great things about Agile and being Agile is able to adapt to change. So if we're able to adapt to change, if we're still considering the outcome of what we're trying to deliver, the business value at the end of the day, because every company wants to produce money, so that's not even a question, then yes, we are making things better day by day. But the reality is there isn't one team that's 100% agile. I haven't
Well,
seen it so far.
I think that's the great myth amongst agile itself, is whether there is the prototypical team. And I also think that's a great place to pause to thank the sponsors and also talk about the Patreon that I have, because that's where every guest of mine gets a bonus conversation, and Samina is no different. So, in our bonus conversation, we're going to be talking about the differences in roles like Scrum Master, Delivery Manager, Project and Program Manager, and why they're often misunderstood as the roles that people think they are versus what they actually are. And we're going to be talking about some hybrid methodologies and the reality of them versus what we think they are.
Fun topics.
Yeah, I'll let you get really hot with those takes behind the paywall.
Looking forward.
And the key behind the Patreon, though, is that's where the experts that I bring on share the real good stuff. For $5 a month, you get access to all these experts I've had on the show, because every guest does a post-mortem interview. So, moving back to the conversation at hand, I want to talk about something that I know you've been writing about and you're pretty passionate about, and that is staying sane in the PM world using unhealthy versus healthy coping mechanisms.
Yes, it is a very dear topic to me because I've been through this many, many times before. And I think, especially in the profession that we've chosen, staying sane is usually a challenge because we're dealing with a lot of pressure on a day to day basis. We're dealing with different types of stakeholders, different types of challenges, risks, issues, people overreacting, people underreacting, psychological safety, and a lot of those topics. And staying sane throughout all of these is definitely something that's really important. So some of the things that I usually consider around staying sane are making sure that I do have a balance in terms of how much time I invest in my work versus my life after my 9 to 5. And it's usually around the balance of, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm doing a 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 every day, but I do have periods where I recharge, whether that is listening to music, whether that is snowboarding, which is a hobby that I've recently picked up and I'm bad at it, or just making time for myself and making time for the things that bring me joy. They may be small things, baking, listening to music, running, jogging, something like that. But it is really important to have that balance in terms of how much time you dedicate to your work versus your profession, versus your personal life, your hobbies, your family, your friends. the things that actually bring you joy. And there are a lot of other things you could consider here. And what I usually do during the time when I'm at work, I do have friends. I know that one of the
Wait, you have
misconceptions that,
friends?
yes, I have friends at work in the corporate world. Yes, that actually happens.
And let me guess, they're at your organization and not just
Yes,
everywhere else too?
yes. I know that one of the misconceptions is you're not supposed to be making friends at work. And I don't agree with this because some of the people that we work with have chosen the same profession. Being a project manager, a delivery manager, scrum master, whatever we call the title, somewhat in the delivery in the same space, which means that those people are going through the same challenges we are going on a day-to-day basis, which means not only are they going through the same challenges, but they might have tips and tricks, or you might be able to exchange pleasant conversations with them, or just do group therapy if all else fails. So I do have friends at work. I do have a small circle of people that I interact with. I am a huge believer of community of practices, having in different organizations people that you can exchange ideas with, like dealing with stakeholders, doing better planning, the typical topics you would find, and exchanging words with people that understand the world of project management is a huge benefit because we're all humans. We all have friends and family at home, but they don't all understand the world of project management to the nitty gritty and to the amount of detail that we're exposed to on a day to day basis. So having someone to talk to that speaks the same language definitely helps.
Yeah, and on this topic, I want to highlight something because I know I was skimming through your past writings, and when I do that, I don't go to the most recent stuff just because recency bias. And when you were writing about this, one of the things you talked about was like drinking your cup of coffee or whatever it is. And one thing I realized very quickly was I was going through a very stressful period in my life, and I dubbed an energy drink my emotional support energy drink. And then I very quickly realized that if that's how I think of it, as that's what I go to drink when I'm stressed out and frustrated, then my body associates energy drinks with that feeling. So if I'm having a good day and I go grab an energy drink, I'm automatically going to take my mind back to that place of frustration and anger when that's where I go to those
Hmm.
that's where I've trained my body to go to for those to bring me joy or to whatever it may be. And when we talk about coping mechanisms, we go to comfort places, but think about that too when you're doing things. If you're building a habit of something that may bring you a moment of joy in your day at work while you're stressed out all the time, if you do that outside of work, you're subconsciously taking your body to that place that you are at work.
I used to do the same with coffee until I realized several years ago I was going through a really stressful period of time and I used to have several coffees throughout the day. But then I realized that during the weekend when I was no longer working, if I saw coffee, I immediately had like a huge pain in my stomach. I used to have migraines, and it took me a really long time to figure out, like you mentioned, that I associated coffee with stressful periods in my
Yeah.
life. And it took a really long time to get over that part. Now I appreciate coffee, by the way, and it is one of my most appreciated rituals that I do in the morning, and I no longer associate coffee with stress. But as you mentioned, we do have the tendency of associating certain behaviors or certain moments in the day with stressful periods of time. And it is really important to also to keep note of that and try as much as possible to leave the things that bring us joy for happy moments rather than associate them with stressful periods of time, whether that is coffee or an energy drink or perhaps a cookie or something else.
And to your point about the conversations, that was one of my motivations when I revamped the show was I wanted to have the conversations that we as project professionals, because I don't want to just say project managers, but we as project professionals have on a daily basis amongst ourselves, whether that's through LinkedIn, whether that's through texting with friends, whatever it may be. All of us have a lot very similar conversations amongst each other, change details, change times, whatever it may be. But I wanted to bring those conversations to the forefront and not sugarcoat what we do.
It's not an easy job, but it can be really rewardful at times.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things where we talk about, there's a lot of negativity, I'll say, about the profession. And that is that the age old statement that you hear is the PM gets blamed when the project fails, but then everyone else gets rewarded when it goes right. And I've been pushing back on this left and right saying that's because you're doing a poor job as your own PR person as a PM.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Visibility and, well, making things known to the organization is a huge factor of a, well, as you mentioned, professionally in the realms of projects, not necessarily project manager or scrum master or whatever the title may be, and being visible in the organization is something that's really important. I mean, you may deliver projects on a day-to-day basis. They may all be successful, but the organization doesn't hear about those. So that means that yourself promoting your abilities and the skills that you have, you're not really doing a great job. And promoting that is a huge aspect of any delivery job for that matter, because that's where promotions come in. That's where trust is basically being gained. And also in terms of collaboration, you may get different sponsors that may help you with different topics that might help expedite things, might help with escalations and different things. So having a network within the organization, huge aspect. And that comes from visibility and, well, promoting the work that you do.
Yeah, I always say that if you won't promote yourself, why should anyone else?
Exactly.
And I think that overall, we talk about PMs lead through influence without authority. Well, guess what? The more trust you garner with the executive leadership or your personal leadership and all those types of people that you're competent and you know what you're doing, the more room they give you to be able to go make decisions and go impact things without needing to go ask for permission because they trust you.
Yes, you basically build an experience and you basically build a portfolio of things you previously delivered, so they trust you to go again and do the same thing for other topics or for other projects, other initiatives, other pieces of work. So I do agree with you in that matter, Trevor.
And not only that, but you build that trust that what you tell them is the is all of the truth, not just the part that you want them to hear.
Yes, for sure.
Because how many retrospectives have we all been in where we're talking about things and actually not retrospective, it's sprint review because that's the one with the stakeholders and everybody.
Hmm.
You're in a sprint review and you only show the stuff that you know works, but you never leave off the part of the sprint that was half done, but it was only meant to be half done.
Well, that's a whole other different topic, and I know that for some folks out there listening, it's going to be one of those sensitive topics. What do we actually show in demos and in sprint reviews? Because it goes back to the definition of done. It goes back to several other different things, whether should we show something that's not complete but maybe might help us gather feedback. Because if we think about Agile and the principles that we have around Agile, and going back to the definition of done, we're only supposed to be showing things that are working, that are finalized. But the reality of things is, if you have a certain meeting with a certain set of people that might be able to provide you good, valuable feedback, why not do it? Because the framework doesn't tell you this. Well, the framework can be adapted to suit the needs that you have in the organization and in the team.
Yeah. And if you're in a waterfall environment, yes, you do not want to show off a partially finished product. But if you're in an agile environment where you're not supposed to have full functionality of a part of a website, but you only need to have part of it for that sprint, according to your velocity, according to your story points, according to what you promised, it's okay to show a broken process if that's what the definition of done was for that sprint.
Yep, I agree with you.
So I always ask guests to give me prompts for stories because I want to hear these stories just like everybody else does for the first time. And you gave me one that I really caught my eye and got me intrigued. And that was a time when doing agile by the book made delivery worse and not better.
Yeah, this was a really interesting one because it was when I transitioned from a traditional project manager to a scrum master. And the organization that I was part of was going through an agile transformation. So not only were we going through an agile transformation, but we were trying to implement Scrum by the book, meaning we really aimed at having time box ceremonies. We really aimed at making sure teams were, well, as good as they could get in terms of Scrum delivery. But the main challenge there is the teams were so good within their own silos that they didn't collaborate with each other. And what actually got us in trouble is we were really close to a particular release for a certain functionality that we had to do, and we realized really late in the process, like just a few hours before going ahead with our release, that we had a dependency on a different team. We had no idea how to reach that team because they were in a different time zone. We had a really huge challenge there in terms of the language barrier, time zone barrier, and the fact that we didn't have a clear owner for that component. And what we ended up doing is we had to push the release because there was no way around it. But the main aspect here is not only was our team really capable and really good at Scrum and Agile in general, but the other team was as well. But we didn't consider it as an ecosystem as a whole. So we didn't map our dependencies, we didn't map our components, our applications, we didn't map our prerequisites in terms of releases. Like, do we have to consider other teams before going ahead with this process? Do we have to consider perhaps downtime? Do we have to consider, are we impacting any other team within the organization? So we were really good at our own thing in a silo, but we didn't consider the whole ecosystem here. And I think many organizations are going through the same thing because Agile at its core wasn't meant to be something that's scalable. So it was meant to be something somewhat of a clean environment. It was meant to be something that's really small and that's really sustainable for smaller teams. Yes, we do have SAFe right now, and we do have other frameworks that are addressing that scalability aspect of things. But Scrum, at its core, as one of the frameworks in Agile, at that point, when we were going through the transformation, it wasn't something that we were originally considering.
So I just thought of something and I want to kind of get your take on this now. And that
Sure.
is, after hearing that story, you were trained as project professionals that projects become programs, programs become portfolios, portfolios fall under the PMO. Now, when you're talking about agile, that's not really by definition a project because by definition a project has to have a start and finish date.
Hmm.
I worked in a PMO as a governance person as one of my first roles as a junior PM. And I would often ask, because we had these agile teams that were website development, the standard 2 weeks per continuous improvement teams that every year we just re-up their budget, re-up their renewal, and don't think twice about it. And I asked, aren't those initiatives rather than projects? And everyone looked at me like I was the moron.
Well,
And
you raise a really fair point here
and
because, yeah, sorry.
taking that one step further to your example, would agile fall into the bigger framework of programs and portfolios as dependent different initiatives essentially becoming grouped together, similar dependencies and all that?
There is a fairly good point here because, again, I'm going back to that point of considering the reality of things rather
Mm-hmm.
than what we're taught by the books. And it's a huge aspect of things. We're not working on things in silos. We're not delivering things in silos. Most organizations, the reality is they have dependencies. This is not something that you can, well, remove from the
Mm-hmm.
equation, so to say. So to that aspect, yes, maybe we should consider the program aspect of things, the initiative level, or perhaps even the whole ecosystem here. And if we are considering that, then we also need to consider how do teams work together in a rhythm that is scalable, because you might have different teams that are responsible for different services or components within the organization, but they're on different rhythms. So what
Mm-hmm.
one team delivers might not be the same as another team. So you would have to consider the rhythm of delivery. You would have to consider estimations of work. So you would have to have comparable things. And you would also have to have the dependencies mapped out really, really down to a granular level, which kind of contradicts a little bit some of the agile principles we have around documentation. Because we're supposed to be focusing on people rather than documentation, and we're supposed to be focusing on that speed of delivery rather than having really documented things and really granular things in terms of the organization. It's somewhat, maybe we're at the point where Agile needs to evolve and
Well,
we need to consider the current context.
and then you take into account your scrum master. What's the next level up from a scrum master to equate to a similar role as a program manager in agile? Because if you think about it, let's say you've got five, we'll call them initiatives for proper definition.
Hmm.
We group them all together, and then you decide you've got to have somebody overseeing those initiatives to decide where that rhythm goes. Because if you have them all on the same sprint schedule, then you're going to run into a clash of multiple items delivered ideally at the same time hitting each other. But if they're off sync, then you've got lead and lag coming into play essentially, because you could be having one team done with their part, waiting on another, and so on and so forth.
And another, so I'm going to add something else into the mix. You may have
Mm-hmm.
situations where the sprint length is different. So one team is working on
Yeah.
2 week sprints, another 3 or 4 weeks, depending on what makes sense for them. And you might not have all sprints aligned. So one team is starting their sprint this week, but another team is starting the following week. Or if you have a 3 week sprints, we have even a difference there as well. So you would have to make sure that your sprints are aligned, they're of the same length. People estimate in the same matter, so they're using the same tool, they're using the same definitions of done, of ready, and they're using basically the
Story
same,
points.
yes, the same organization across. And that usually means that you would have to have an additional role, not just a Scrum Master role, because a Scrum Master usually is someone that's assigned to one, maybe two teams. So you would have to have an additional layer there. And this is the time where other roles usually come into play. In the organizations that I used to be part of at some point in time, we used to have delivery managers. And delivery managers would be the people that would be responsible for making sure that those teams do collaborate with each other, do talk to each other, they do consider dependencies and schedules and things like that. But if you ask different organizations what that role is called, you're going to hear different names. So sometimes it's called an agile lead, a delivery manager, a portfolio manager, a program manager, an agile program manager. So you have different titles, but they all refer to the same thing. So you have to have someone that connects all the dots.
Prefer the name Scrum Wizard.
Oh, yes. I haven't heard that before, but it makes sense.
Oh, I just made it up.
I'm 100% with you on that, Trevor. So let's make it happen.
If we're going to have fun with this, why not have fun with it, right?
Yeah. Actually writing that down.
Because that's, by definition, the wizard makes magic happen. And if you're overseeing multiple Scrum teams or multiple Agile teams, you're making magic happen. I don't care who you are or how organized you are. You're making magic happen.
Yeah, but here's the thing. So this is another interesting point if you consider Agile and the principles behind that. When you have that particular layer and that particular role, it kind of goes against some of the principles that you have in Agile in terms of having line management. So people in Agile working in Scrum teams, in Kanban teams, are supposed to be self-managed and self-organized. Meaning you don't have a team leader role, you don't have a leader that they report into. But with this additional role, you do have to have someone that considers that. In terms of that evolution for Agile, I am a firm believer we should take some of the principles, we should take the things that work, but we do need evolution at some point in time. So we may be at the very point where we're going to see some changes. We're going to see things being adapted to the current market conditions because that's also another aspect of things, what the organizations look for in terms of roles. We no longer see dedicated Scrum Master roles on the market. Even the project manager roles have changed in terms of expectation, in terms of the responsibilities that are being given. So various different topics to consider.
Yeah, we're not even going to get into roles and descriptions of roles because that's a whole nother rabbit hole that is just insanity at its finest. Because I wrote about this last year, and it caught wildfire that a Scrum Master is not a project manager of Agile projects.
Well, that's a sensitive topic.
Yeah, and we're not. I don't even want to go there, but it caught fire because I caught so much heat in the comments on some of that stuff, and I had to keep explaining to people, I've got 3,000 characters to write a comparison that has so much nuance and detail to it, and I was speaking in generalities. And I had people telling me I'm a project manager and Scrum Master in my organization. And I just sat there looking at it in my head going, then you suck at both probably, because if you fill both hats, you can't do both well in the same place.
No, because you have conflicting priorities. Exactly. And if you think about what the accountabilities for a project manager are, well, it's different than a Scrum Master. But as you mentioned, that's a whole different topic. And then we have Agile project managers out there in the wild. And
which is a contradiction in of itself.
Yeah, but I mean, personally, I've held those roles in the past. I was in a position where I had to, fulfill multiple. I wore different hats. I was a product owner, I was a Scrum Master and a project manager all in the same day, which is not ideal. But I mean, you have to make do with what you have at the moment in time that you're given. So it was an interesting experience. Don't get me wrong. I learned so many different things. Do I want to repeat it? Most probably not, but I still learned something from it.
But I'll ask you this, though. Did you do, we'll say, one of them well and the rest of them okay?
Yes. Because I chose one that was more important to me.
But that's why I'm reinforcing that point of then you suck at all of it, because you can't do three professions well with expertise in all three at the same time.
Yes. And I agree with you.
And odds are, if you're wearing three hats like that, you've got as subject matter experience in one of those three. The other two, you've got enough to get you by.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And that is the reality of some organizations, unfortunately.
And that And I say that not saying I'm not trying to throw shade at people,
Mhm.
but the reality is that we're talking about honest conversation here. And that is the honest conversation is that if you've got a subject matter expert in something, jack of all trades is a master of none. And if you're
Mhm.
a master of one, then you're not a master of all.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the things that could be done there and what I've tried to do before leaving that said organization was going back to promoting and going back to having that network of people with the trust and credibility and everything. I did go towards that direction. So as I mentioned, I chose something that was dear and near to my heart, which was the Scrum aspect of things, because I am a little bit biased when it comes to roles, and I've noticed that's something I usually gravitate towards. And I was doing that aspect of things really well. As you mentioned, I was doing the other just getting by. And I was trying to influence that organization to that sense and trying to present, well, this is what we're gaining, this is what we're losing. We
Mhm.
can be experts in all three fields. If we're doing this part, well, do we care about business value? Do we care about what we're prioritizing? Do we care about fixing the right problems? Well, to keep it short, the organization didn't change. It's still the same, but I tried.
And at the end of the day, if you're wearing all three hats, I always say that there has to be a healthy tension between the product owner and the scrum master
Hmm.
because what's the definition of compromise? Nobody's happy. Everybody is happy and nobody gets what they want. But if you're the person that's wearing both of those, whichever side your passion is towards is the side that's going to get influenced and the other side's going to get left behind.
Yes.
So I think we're at a good stopping point, and I want to wrap with well, first thing I want to do is I have a personalized question that every guest gets. You look scared.
Should I be?
So, my question for you is going to be a somewhat fun one. And that is what is something that you want the audience to take away from Romania that busts a myth, so to speak, of what we think of when we think of Romania?
That is such a great question, Trevor. I did not expect this, to be honest. I expected many things in the realm of project management, Agile, and Scrum, and you name it, but this I did not expect. Well, if I'm thinking about history and the way that we've evolved as a country, especially around the fact that we're located in Eastern Europe and the fact that we used to be a communist country up until a certain point in time, I know that one of the misconceptions is around the personalities that we have in Romania, especially around warmth. So we are warm people and we do focus a lot on the human aspect of things, that emotional connection with people. And especially when I'm interacting with folks for the first time, either from North or South America, this is something that I've noticed, is they have a tendency to associate us with the communist period of the
Hmm.
country, meaning that we're not great communicators. We don't really care about people. We're too direct. We're really cold. And that's not the case. So most Romanians are really warm people. They're welcoming people. They welcome new friendships and new connections. And well, one thing that I can say is come visit Romania. We have vampires at times.
Well, I was about to say, isn't the story true that vampires can only come in if you invite them in?
Well, it depends. You'll just have to try it out and see what works.
Or am I thinking of a different myth?
Well, some people may look really, really young. So this is one of the things that people might consider them vampires because they look really, really young
Hmm.
for their age. The general consensus is you keep vampires away with garlic.
Hmm.
You don't see their reflection in the mirror. And well, you have to invite them in. But I guess that's for the audience to test when they're in Romania.
All right. Well, I want to pass the floor over to you to tell the audience where they can find you, what you're up to, all that great stuff.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Trevor. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's usually where I express my opinions and, well, in the great scheme of the internet. I also have two blogs on the Medium platform and Substack. Scrum and Sass is my little corner in the internet that I'm really, really proud of. That's usually the corner of the internet where I have unfiltered opinions about Agile and project management in general. And yeah, to keep it short, those are the two platforms that I'm usually posting and expressing my opinions.
And I'll have links to all of those in the show notes for the audience to find you.
Thank you. Do appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you for your time. I want to thank the sponsors. I want to thank the listeners. And most importantly, I want to thank the Patreon subscribers because they're the ones that keep this show going, help fund it. And also remember that it costs nothing to like, subscribe, and follow. It's the best deal in town. Your ROI on it is amazing because you're going to keep getting new episodes with great guests. And also, if you enjoyed this show, tell all your friends. If you didn't enjoy the show, go in the catalog and find a different guest because I'm sure there's one that you will enjoy. No offense to you, but some people might be triggered by Agile.
I know. Or by vampires, by that matter.
Hey,
So,
it all works.
not taking things personally.
If you took it personally by now, then you don't know me. So I'll end like I always do. Mail your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Simina Fodor, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening.